You know, Christmas has always been my favorite time of year. There's something about the glow of lights, the chill in the air, and the excuse to drink hot chocolate without feeling judged. This year, though, Christmas hit differently. And not in a good way. Her name was Emily. We'd been together for about a year, and I'd never been so sure about anything in my life. She had this way of making everything feel easy, like even the bad days didn't stand a chance around her. We'd planned to spend the holidays together. Her family was out of town, so it made sense for her to stay with me and my folks. My mom, of course, was over the moon about it. She already thought Emily was future daughter-in-law material. I wasn't far behind on that thought, to be honest. Things started off great. We decorated the tree together, sang along to Mariah Carey like we were auditioning for a Christmas musical, and even made sugar cookies from scratch. Okay, well, she made them, and I just ate the dough and pretended to help. It was perfect, or at least it seemed that way. Then came the night of the Christmas Eve party. My buddy Jake throws this huge get-together every year, friends, family, people you barely know but feel obligated to invite because they'll hear about it otherwise. It's the kind of thing you look forward to, mostly because Jake's house always looks like a Hallmark movie exploded in it. Emily looked amazing that night. Everyone loved her, she had that charm. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be the guy standing next to her. Emily was friendly, probably the most social person I'd ever met. She had this knack for striking up conversations with just about anyone, and people were drawn to her so, when I glanced around the room and couldn't spot her, I figured she was off chatting with someone. But then 15 minutes passed. Then 20. I started to feel that knot in my stomach, the kind that tells you something's off even when you don't want to believe it. I looked around again, scanning the room. She wasn't by the fireplace with the group playing charades, or in the kitchen raiding Jake's snack table. I even checked outside where a few people were braving the cold for a smoke. That's when I saw her, Emily, down the hallway, standing way too close to this guy named Ryan. Now, Ryan's the kind of guy who walks into a room and makes himself the center of attention whether you want him to or not. Tall, slick hair, always throwing out compliments that ride the line between charming and sleazy. He wasn't exactly someone I'd call a friend, but he and Jake were tight, so he was around often enough for me to know his vibe. They were standing near the guest bedroom, half hidden in the shadows. Emily was laughing at something he'd said, her head tilted back like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. And then he leaned in closer. Not just a little closer, close enough that it made my stomach drop. I froze for a second, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It's not like they were kissing or anything, but something about the way they were standing felt wrong. Too comfortable. Too familiar. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe I was just jealous because Ryan's always been a little too smooth for his own good. But when she put her hand on his arm, this light, lingering touch, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I walked over, heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. "Hey, Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything okay?" She jumped a little, like she hadn't even noticed me coming up. "Oh, hey, babe," she said, her voice all bright and cheery. "Ryan was just telling me about his trip to Aspen last year." Sounds amazing, doesn't it? Ryan gave me one of those cocky smiles that made me want to punch him right there. "Yeah, man, you should check it out sometime." Emily was saying she loves skiing. I clenched my jaw, trying not to let the irritation show. "Yeah, we've talked about going together sometime," I said, emphasizing the together, just enough to make my point. Emily slid her arm around my waist then, like she was trying to smooth things over. "We were just talking, babe. You know me, I can't help being friendly." Friendly. That word stuck in my head like a splinter. I forced a smile and nodded, but something about the whole interaction didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just her being friendly. It was the way Ryan looked at her, like he knew something I didn't. The rest of the night was weird. Emily went back to mingling, and I tried to shake off what I'd seen, telling myself it was all in my head. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Every time I glanced her way, I found myself watching her a little too closely, looking for signs, clues, something to prove or disprove the doubt creeping in. She didn't stick by me much after that. Normally, at these kinds of gatherings, she'd stay close, making jokes and squeezing my hand every so often, like we were a team. But tonight, she flitted from group to group, always laughing, always charming, while I just lingered. It felt like I was on the outside looking in, and it sucked. Around midnight, Jake gathered everyone in the living room for his annual gift exchange. It's one of those things where everyone brings a goofy, wrapped present, and you pick one at random. People were laughing, stealing each other's gifts, and Emily ended up with a pair of reindeer antlers that lit up when you pressed a button. She wore them proudly, of course, turning the little lights on and off while everyone cheered. The rest of the night was weird. Emily went back to mingling, and I tried to shake off what I'd seen, telling myself it was all in my head. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Every time I glanced her way, I found myself watching her a little too closely, looking for signs, clues, something to prove or disprove the doubt creeping in. She didn't stick by me much after that. Normally, at these kinds of gatherings, she'd stay close, making jokes and squeezing my hand every so often, like we were a team. But tonight, she flitted from group to group, always laughing, always charming, while I just lingered. It felt like I was on the outside looking in, and it sucked. Around midnight, Jake gathered everyone in the living room for his annual gift exchange. It's one of those things where everyone brings a goofy, wrapped present, and you pick one at random. People were laughing, stealing each other's gifts, and Emily ended up with a pair of reindeer antlers that lit up when you pressed a button. She wore them proudly, of course, turning the little lights on and off while everyone cheered. For a moment, I let myself relax. Maybe I'd been overreacting earlier. Maybe Emily was just being her usual, lively self, and I was the one letting my insecurities get the better of me. I mean, she was still my Emily, right? The girl who made ugly Christmas sweaters look good and convinced me to watch cheesy holiday rom-coms without complaining. But then, as the party started to wind down, I caught sight of her again. This time, she was standing by the stairs, talking to Ryan. And this wasn't just casual chatting. They were close, closer than before. Her hand brushed his chest as she laughed, and he leaned in, whispering something that made her blush. Blush. That was it. My heart sank like a rock in water. I didn't want to believe it, but the way they looked at each other told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't just friendly. It was something else. Something more. I stood there, frozen, torn between walking away and confronting her. Part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to just let it go and hope I was wrong. But the other part, the part that couldn't stand the thought of being played, couldn't let it slide. Finally, I walked over, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Emily," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Can we talk? Alone?" Her eyes widened for a second, but she nodded. "Sure," she said, her tone a little too casual. She glanced at Ryan, then back at me. "What's up?" I didn't answer right away, just turned and headed toward the front porch. She followed, and as soon as we stepped outside into the freezing air, I turned to her. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Between you and Ryan?" She blinked, like she couldn't believe I'd asked. "What?" "Nothing's going on. Why would you even think that?" "Don't lie to me, Emily," I said, my chest tightening. "I saw the way you two were acting. The way he looks at you, the way you look at him. It's not just friendly." For a second, she just stood there, biting her lip and avoiding my eyes. And that's when I knew. I didn't need her to say it, I could see it plain as day in her face. She sighed, crossing her arms as if the cold wasn't already biting through both of us. Look, you're overthinking this, she said, her voice defensive now. Ryan and I were just talking. He's an old friend of Jake's. I didn't want to be rude. Don't give me that, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm not blind, Emily. I saw the way he touched your arm, the way you smiled at him. That's not just being polite. Her expression shifted, a mix of frustration and something else, guilt, maybe. She glanced away, her breath fogging up in the icy air. It didn't mean anything, she muttered. It was just, stupid flirting. That's all. Stupid flirting. The words hit me like a slap. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. Do you even hear yourself right now? You're supposed to be my girlfriend, Emily. What the hell are you doing flirting with some guy at a Christmas party? She looked back at me then, her eyes flashing. I wasn't thinking, okay? I got caught up in the moment. He's just really charming, and it didn't feel like a big deal. Not a big deal? I echoed, my voice rising despite myself. How would you feel if I was off in some corner with another girl, making her blush and laugh like that? Would that not be a big deal to you? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. I could see the wheels turning in her head, like she was trying to come up with something that would make this all go away. But nothing she said could undo what I'd seen, or how it made me feel. Look, she finally said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to hurt you. It was stupid, and it won't happen again. Can we just forget about it and enjoy the rest of the night? I stared at her, searching her face for some kind of sincerity, some proof that she really meant it. But all I could think about was the way she'd looked at Ryan, like I wasn't even in the room. I don't know, Emily, I said quietly, the weight of it all sinking in. I don't know if I can just forget about it. Her face fell, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. Please, she whispered. I love you, okay? You know that. But in that moment, I wasn't so sure I did. We stood there in the cold, the silence between us heavier than the snow starting to fall. She kept looking at me with those wide eyes, like she was waiting for me to say something that would fix everything. But what was there to say? I couldn't even piece together how I felt, let alone figure out what to do next. I need some air, I finally muttered, stepping back. Her face twisted, like I'd just hit her. Wait, where are you going? I don't know, Emily, I said, running a hand through my hair. I just need a minute to think. Alone. I didn't wait for her to answer. I turned and walked down the driveway, the icy wind biting at my face. Part of me expected her to follow, but she didn't. She stayed there on the porch, watching me go, until I disappeared into the street. I ended up at the park a few blocks over. It was one of those small neighborhood spots with a couple of benches, a frozen-over pond, and some sad-looking Christmas lights strung up on the gazebo. I sat down on a bench, staring at the lights and trying to make sense of the knot of emotions twisting in my chest. She said she loved me. And maybe she did, but love's supposed to come with respect, isn't it? If she loved me, why would she even let herself get caught up in stupid flirting, as she called it? Why would she look at someone else like that, like I wasn't enough? The thought made my stomach turn. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw tonight was just the tip of the iceberg. Maybe it was nothing, like she said. Or maybe it was something. Either way, the trust we'd built, the foundation I thought was rock solid, now felt like it had cracks running all through it. I must have sat there for half an hour, maybe more, lost in my thoughts. At some point, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen. Emily, can we please talk? I'm sorry. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to reply, to hear her out, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But another part of me, bigger, louder, was screaming that I needed to walk away. That I deserved better than someone who made me feel like this. I didn't text back. Not right away. Instead, I leaned back on the bench, watching my breath fog up in the cold air, and tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. By the time I made it back to Jake's house, most of the guests had left. Emily wasn't in the living room. She wasn't in the kitchen either. For a second, I wondered if she'd left, but her coat was still hanging by the door. I headed upstairs, figuring she might have gone to one of the spare rooms to cool off or maybe just get away from the awkwardness of it all. And that's when I heard voices. Quiet, but not quiet enough. They were coming from the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. My heart started pounding, that familiar mix of dread and anger bubbling up again. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to assume the worst, but my gut already knew better. The door was cracked open, just enough for me to see inside. And there they were. Emily and Ryan. Sitting on the edge of the bed, faces close, her hand resting lightly on his knee. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. For a second, I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there, staring at the scene in front of me, trying to process what I was seeing. Then, as if sensing me, Emily looked up. Her eyes met mine, and I saw her face fall, shock, guilt, panic, all rolled into one. She jerked her hand back like the bed was on fire and stood up so fast she nearly tripped. "Ethan," she stammered, her voice shaking. "It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" I said, my voice louder than I intended. "What the hell is it, then? Because it sure looks like you're cozying up to him again, after everything you said." Ryan, to his credit, or maybe to his complete lack of self-preservation, stood up too, hands raised like he was trying to defuse a bomb. "Hey, man, chill. It's not a big deal. We were just talking." "Talking?" I snapped, stepping into the room. "Is that what you call this? Talking? You've been all over her all night, and now you're here, alone, in a bedroom?" Emily stepped between us, her hands up like she was trying to shield me from Ryan, or maybe Ryan from me. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice desperate. "It wasn't. I didn't mean for it to." "To what?" I interrupted, my chest tight. "To happen? Because it looks like it already has." She opened her mouth to reply but didn't say anything. And that silence, that pause, was all I needed to know. I shook my head, the weight of it all crashing down on me. "You know what?" I said, backing toward the door. "I'm done. I can't do this." "Ethan, wait," she called after me, but I was already gone, heading down the stairs and out the door, leaving her and Ryan and everything else behind. The cold hit me like a slap in the face as I stepped outside, but I didn't care. My mind was spinning, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. It felt surreal, like some twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept walking, my boots crunching against the snow-covered sidewalk. I didn't know where I was going, anywhere but there. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, and I already knew who it was before I even looked. Sure enough, Emily's name lit up the screen. "Emily, please come back. Let's talk. I'm so sorry." I turned off the screen without replying and shoved the phone back into my pocket. I didn't want to hear her apologies, her excuses, her attempts to explain something that didn't need explaining. I'd seen enough. Whatever she thought she could say to fix this, it wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't change the way she made me feel tonight, like I was second best. After walking aimlessly for what felt like forever, I found myself back at the park. The same bench I'd sat on earlier was now covered in a thin layer of snow, but I didn't care. I brushed it off and sat down, letting the cold seep through my jacket as I stared at the empty street in front of me. How had it come to this? Just hours ago, I thought Emily and I were solid, unshakable. I thought we had something real, something worth holding on to. But now, all I could think about was the look on her face when I caught her with Ryan. The guilt, the panic, like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. The worst part? A small, stubborn part of me still wanted to believe her. Still wanted to go back, hear her out, and pretend this whole thing never happened. Because despite everything, I loved her. I really, genuinely loved her. And letting go of that love felt like tearing out a piece of myself. But love, I realized, wasn't enough. Not without trust. And tonight, Emily had shattered that trust in a way I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I sat there for a long time, until my fingers were numb and my breath felt like ice in my lungs. Eventually, I pulled out my phone again, staring at her name in my messages. I could see the little ellipsis, a sign she was typing another message. But before it came through, I pressed the block button. It wasn't easy. My hand trembled as I did it, like my body was fighting against what my mind knew was right. But the second her name disappeared from my screen, I felt a strange, bittersweet relief. It was over. For real this time. I stayed on that bench until the snow started falling harder, covering the world around me in a quiet, frozen stillness. And as I got up to leave, heading back home to face whatever came next, I told myself one thing: this Christmas might be the one that broke me, but it wouldn't be the one that defined me.